My name is Paige Tanner. I'm 34 years old, and I learned what my family truly thought about me while I was lying in a hospital bed. 6 weeks earlier, I had given birth to my daughter, Nora. Then, while I was driving home after a late shift, a truck ran a red light on fax and crashed into my car. When I woke up, I had 3 broken ribs, a punctured lung, and my right arm was in a cast. My husband, Daniel, was in Seattle, 6 hours away from home. Someone had to take care of our newborn that night, and my mother lived only 20 minutes from the hospital. She said, "No." She told Daniel one sentence, and that sentence is why you're here today. Your sister never has these kinds of emergencies. My sister was on a Caribbean cruise. My mother was sitting in a casino. What I did from that hospital bed over the next 3 minutes changed the next 9 years and $486,000. And that wasn't even the part that broke them. The part that broke them walked through my hospital room door 3 hours later. An old man carrying a worn-out folder looked at me and said something none of them ever expected to hear out loud. "Welcome to the place where quiet people finally settle the score." If someone in your life has ever treated your kindness like something they could keep using forever, then this story is for you. Leave a comment and tell me who was really there for you when you needed help. And be sure to subscribe too. I want to tell you about the phone call first, because that's where everything began. I slowly woke up from the anesthesia in a small emergency room area separated by curtains. The first thing I noticed was how heavy and strange the cast felt on my right arm. Then I felt the plastic hospital ID bracelet wrapped tightly around my left wrist. A nurse was softly saying my name. She sounded like she had already called it several times. My ribs hurt so badly that it felt like someone had parked a car on my chest. Daniel was on speakerphone beside my pillow. His voice had that calm, careful sound he always uses when he's scared, but trying not to show it. "Paige, the babysitter can't stay after 11. I called your mom." I already knew what he was going to say before he said it. "She won't come." There was a short silence. Behind his voice, I could clearly hear another sound. The electronic bells and chatter of slot machines. The happy music that plays when someone wins. My mother was at Black Hawk Casino with her friends. She told Daniel she couldn't drive over because she had promised to watch my sister Megan's cat while Megan was on her cruise. A cat. My 6-week-old daughter needed someone to care for her for one night. And my mother chose a cat. I didn't cry. I want you to understand that part. Most people expect a woman lying in a hospital bed to fall apart. I didn't. I looked at the hospital bracelet on my wrist. Then I reached over with my left hand and picked up my phone from the tray beside me. There were important things that needed to be handled. I had always been very good at handling problems. That had always been my biggest weakness. You need to know who I was before that night, because it explains why my family treated me the way they did. I grew up in a small rented duplex in Aurora. The heating only worked when it felt like working. I paid for community college by working closing shifts at a grocery store. Later, I earned a scholarship and transferred into a finance program that nobody in my family really understood. By the time I turned 30, I was a senior financial analyst at a Fortune 500 company downtown. Whenever the numbers had to be perfect, I was the person they trusted. I worked with spreadsheets every day. Numbers don't play favorites. Numbers don't lie. I wish I could say the same thing about some people. Daniel and I got married when I was 26. We decided to wait before having children. Partly because we wanted to, partly because there was always another family problem that needed money first. We lived simply. 2 incomes. 1 used car. No debt. That quiet lifestyle is the only reason what I'm about to tell you was even possible. For 9 years, I had been sending my parents $4,500 every month. I never told anyone that number. Not my husband. Not my sister. Not anyone. I told myself it was helping pay for my father's heart condition and their mortgage. I told myself I was the only stable person strong enough to carry that responsibility. Being the dependable one had become part of who I was. I'm telling you this now, so you understand something. I wasn't foolish. I was responsible to the point where I completely forgot about myself. Those are two different things. And that night, I finally learned the difference. The first thing I did wasn't revenge. The first thing I did was solve the real problem. Because that's what I've always done. Using my left thumb, I opened the number for the licensed overnight care agency. Daniel and I had researched before Nora was born, but had never needed. A woman answered on the second ring. I calmly told her my name, my situation, and my address. 9 clear sentences. Like it was just another normal Tuesday. I need a night nurse for my 6-week-old daughter tonight. Starting immediately. She asked if the baby was healthy. She's perfect, I answered. I'm the one who's in the hospital. About 40 minutes later, a night nurse named Yvette let herself into our house using the code Daniel had given her. She washed her hands first. Then she sent me a picture of Nora sleeping peacefully with her tiny fist resting against her cheek. I looked at that picture for a long time. The ER nurse standing beside me watched me put my phone down. She asked gently, "Do you have any family who can come?" "It's taken care of," I answered. "Next." She blinked. People always blink when you don't react the way they expect. I wasn't trying to be cold. I was simply dealing with the most important problems first. I had spent my whole life being the only responsible adult in a room full of adults. My daughter was safe. She was warm. Someone was watching her. My husband was flying home. My ribs would heal. That left only one thing on my list. One burden I had carried for 9 years without ever letting myself question it. Now my left hand was free, and my mind had never been clearer. I opened my banking app. The login screen glowed in the dark hospital room like a small cold moon. Inside the app was a page called Recurring Transfers. There were 4 automatic payments. I knew every one of them by heart. The first one said, "Mom and Dad, $2,000 every month." The second one said, "Home, $1,100 every month." That was for the mortgage I believed I was helping pay. The third one said, "Dad Medical, $900. The fourth simply said, "Megan Support, $500. That was $4,500 every month. Every month. For 108 months. I created the first payment when I was 25 years old. That night, my father had called me crying over a hospital bill. I never let myself calculate the total amount. Because once I knew the total, I knew I could never forget it. So this time, I made myself look. The app added everything without emotion. $486,000. Almost $500,000. Gone. one quiet automatic payment after another. While my mother told our relatives they managed everything on their own, I pressed cancel on the first payment. A green check mark appeared. Under it were words I will never forget. Recurring transfer canceled. I canceled the second payment. Recurring transfer canceled. The third. The fourth. 4 taps. Less than 20 seconds. And just like that, 9 years ended. Like turning off a faucet. I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel sad. I only felt an empty kind of peace. The same feeling I get when a spreadsheet finally balances perfectly. As I closed the app, something in my transaction history caught my attention. It was one old payment hidden under the dad medical category. It was from 2 years earlier. The note beside it read, Loan M, $40,000. Not my father's surgery. MM. Megan. I locked my phone. Then I lay quietly in the dark, listening to the heart monitor counting every beat. For the first time in 9 years, I forced myself to ask one simple question. Why had I done all this? Most people would probably say I was desperate for love, or that I let people walk all over me. That answer is easy. But it isn't true. If you've always been the dependable person in your family, then you already understand. I did it because somewhere deep inside me, I believed being needed meant being safe. If everyone depended on me, then no one would ever leave me behind. My grandmother understood that long before I did. Her name was Ruth. She was my mother's mother. She was tall, strong, quiet. She always smelled like coffee and machine oil. She never needed to raise her voice for people to listen. The Thanksgiving before she died, she held my hand. Then she quietly said, Someone has to watch this family's money. Your mother won't. So it'll have to be you. Back then, I thought she meant I should be generous. Now I realize she meant something very different. She meant I needed to be careful. Ruth died peacefully last spring while she was sleeping. At that time, I was busy with a difficult pregnancy and a stressful job. I never asked what she had left behind, or who she had left it to. I simply assumed my mother had handled everything. Just like I assumed my money was paying for my father's medical care. I had spent my whole life believing the best about people. People who had never once earned that trust. I called that love. Lying in that hospital bed, knowing my daughter was only 40 minutes away with a kind stranger caring for her. I finally understood something. I hadn't been supporting my real family. I had been supporting the story I wanted to believe about my family. The real family. Had chosen a cat. Daniel called again during his layover. This time he repeated every word my mother had said. Exactly the way she had said it. Because he knew I would want the truth. He called her at 9 o'clock. He explained I was in surgery. He told her the baby needed someone for just one night. He begged her to drive the 20 minutes. He said she sighed first. That long, dramatic sigh she always uses. Then she told him she couldn't. Megan had finally gone on her dream vacation. Someone had to watch the cat. Then she said it. The sentence I would never forget. Paige always lands on her feet. After that, she added, Your sister never has these emergencies. As if the truck that hit me had checked where I stood in the family before crashing into me. As if my newborn daughter could simply wait until the cruise ended. Daniel's voice broke while telling me. I told him to breathe. I told him Nora was safe. I told him I was going to be okay, and I told him to get on his plane. After we hung up, I opened Instagram. I almost never use Instagram. The first story at the top belonged to Megan. She was standing beside a bright blue pool, holding a coconut drink, smiling. The caption read, "Living my best life, finally." My sister was 29 years old. She wanted to become an influencer. She had around 11,000 followers, and she believed the $500 she received every month simply appeared by magic. I didn't leave a comment. I didn't cry. Instead, I opened my contacts. I selected one name I almost never used. Grandpa H. I typed only 3 words. "We should talk." It looked like Grandpa Harold had been waiting years for that message. Maybe he had. I expected him to send a text back. Instead, my phone started ringing. It was a FaceTime call. From the middle of the Caribbean Sea. It was Megan. I answered with my left hand. Half of my face was hidden in the shadows. She didn't notice the hospital ceiling behind me. She didn't notice the cast on my arm. She didn't ask why I was lying down in the middle of the night. "Paige, finally," she said. She was holding the phone so close that all I could really see was her sunburned nose. "My card got declined at the spa." It was so embarrassing. I stayed quiet. Like always, she rushed to fill the silence herself. "Mom said the family account always pays for me. Did you change something?" And there it was. The entire lie, hidden inside one simple sentence. The family account. My sister truly believed the $500 she received every month came from some magical family account. She thought our parents paid for it. She had no idea the money came from me, because my mother had spent 9 years making sure she never found out. I calmly asked, "Do you know I was in a car accident?" "What? Are you being dramatic right now?" Behind her, a steel drum band started playing. "Can you just fix my card? We dock in Cozumel tomorrow and I have a photo shoot." A photo shoot. I told her I would look into it. That was true. Then I told her I had to go. That was also true. I ended the call before she could say another word. Then I lay there in the dark. The sound of those steel drums stayed in my ears long after the call ended. My sister wasn't exactly a cruel person. In some ways, that made everything even worse. She had simply lived her whole life believing the well would never run dry, because nobody had ever shown her who was carrying the bucket. The next morning, I was moved to a regular hospital room. That was when the family group chat started buzzing nonstop. The group was called Reynolds Family. It included about a dozen relatives, mostly aunts, mostly people who never spoke. I almost never opened it, but the notifications kept appearing. Finally, I looked. My mother had already written a long message. It began with these words: I'm heartbroken to say Paige is being dramatic again and has cruelly cut off her struggling parents. She wrote that my father's health was very fragile. She said they had given me everything. She claimed she didn't know how she would afford his medicine anymore. Then she added something for the audience. We've always managed on our own, but this is so cruel. There it was again. The same lie. Only now, instead of appearing inside my banking app, it was being performed on a public stage. We've always managed on our own. For 9 years, she had repeated that sentence to our relatives, all while quietly accepting my money on the first day of every month. My Aunt Carol had already replied with 3 broken heart emojis. Then she wrote, "Shame on her. Kicking a sick man while he's already down." One of my cousins replied with praying hands. Nobody in that group knew the truth, because nobody had ever been allowed to hear it. As I held my phone, I felt my old habit coming back. The urge to explain everything, to make everyone understand, to smooth everything over, the way I had always done. Instead, I turned my phone over, face down. Explaining belonged to the old version of me. The new version? The one the truck accident had somehow created. Wanted something different. Something simple. Something impossible to argue with. The numbers. And I knew exactly where to find them. Daniel walked into my hospital room around 11 the next morning. He looked exhausted. He hadn't shaved. His face was pale from traveling all night. He carried Nora in her car seat. A diaper bag hung over one shoulder. He had flown straight home, picked up Yvette, taken care of everything, then driven our daughter to the hospital. He placed the car seat gently beside my bed. Then he looked at me. At my cast, at the bruises along my face. His eyes filled with tears. I quietly told him not to cry. Because if he started, I knew I would too. And I still had work to do. He carefully lifted Nora out of the car seat. He laid her gently across my chest, making sure not to hurt my broken ribs. For one quiet minute, the 3 of us simply breathed together. Out of everything that happened that week, that is the one moment I would gladly live again. Then my phone rang. It was my father, Roy Reynolds, 64 years old. The man whose heart I had been paying for during the last 9 years. His voice sounded weak, shaky. Paige. He called me by the nickname he hadn't used since I was a little girl. I didn't know it had gotten this bad. The money, the accident. I didn't know. For one small moment, I believed he might finally stand up for me. I never wanted you carrying all of this, he said. I heard him take a deep breath, like someone about to jump off a cliff. Then, in the background, I heard my mother. Her voice was low and sharp. She asked who he was talking to. The phone suddenly sounded muffled, like someone had covered it with a hand. A few seconds later, he came back, but his voice had completely changed. It had become flat, quiet, empty. I should go. Feel better. Then he hung up. That single phone call perfectly described my father. A kind man who had spent 40 years learning that doing nothing was the safest way to survive inside that house. That afternoon, Daniel brought me my laptop. He placed it on the rolling hospital table. Then I did the one thing that had always helped calm me. I built a spreadsheet, using only my left hand. And a lot of patience, I logged into my bank account, downloaded 9 years of statements, then imported every one of them into a pivot table. This is what I do every day for a company worth billions of dollars. I could certainly do it for my own life. I sorted all $486,000 by where the money had actually gone. Little by little, cell by cell, a completely different story appeared. Not the story my mother had spent years telling everyone. The mortgage I believed I had been paying every month had actually been paid only 10 times in 9 years. Not 108 times. My father's real medical bills, his heart doctor, his medicine, everything together, added up to only about $65,000. So where had the other $421,000 gone? I filtered the records by location and date. One pattern immediately stood out. Hundreds of cash withdrawals. Almost every one of them made within 2 miles of the same zip code. I opened a map. The zip code belonged to Blackhawk. My mother hadn't just happened to be at the casino on the one night she refused to help her granddaughter. She had been going to that same casino for almost 10 years, using my money, while telling our relatives that she managed everything on her own. Then I noticed another pattern. A smaller stream of money. It moved steadily, year after year. I followed it. Every dollar led to one person. Megan. I leaned back as much as my broken ribs would allow. Then I let the numbers speak for themselves. Because numbers had never lied to me. Unlike my family, I want to tell you the exact amounts, because I want you to see them the same way I did. Everything that happened after this depended on these numbers. Out of the $486,000 I had sent, about $65,000 had actually gone toward my father's real medical care. Around $11,000 had gone toward the mortgage. That meant about $410,000 had disappeared somewhere else. It split into 2 separate paths. The first path, about $290,000 over 9 years, had been taken out as cash near the Blackhawk Casino. The withdrawals were always small enough that no single one looked suspicious. The second path led to Megan, about $120,000 over those same 9 years. That total included the mysterious $40,000 marked Loan M. It had been hidden under my father's medical expenses. Nobody questions. Money meant for heart surgery. That money had never been a loan. Nobody had ever expected Megan to pay it back. Later, I discovered exactly what it had paid for. 1 year of building her online brand. A leased SUV. A photographer in Tulum. I printed everything onto one page using the hospital printer. Just one clean sheet. 9 years. 12 rows. Everything was there. Then Daniel showed me something else. He had taken a screenshot from the family group chat. It was a message my mother had sent Aunt Carol before all of this happened. She had proudly written, "We paid for Megan's brand ourselves. That's what good parents do. We paid for it ourselves." I looked at that screenshot. Then I looked at my printed page. something inside me became very calm, very steady. I wasn't going to send angry messages. I wasn't going to argue. I wasn't going to defend myself. I was simply going to put the truth in front of the same audience my mother had been performing for during the last 9 years. Then I was going to walk away. Forever. Never paying for the show again. It's handled, I quietly told Daniel. For the first time. Those words no longer sounded like I was solving a problem. They sounded like a final decision. I want to pause here for just a moment. Because if you've listened this far, you might be someone just like I was. For 9 years, I believed I was paying for my father's heart. Instead, I was paying for slot machines and social media photo shoots. If you've ever sent money because you trusted someone, go look at one bank statement tonight. Just one. Read it as if it belonged to someone else. You might notice something you've never seen before. If this story feels close to your own life, subscribe to. The next part is where my grandfather walks into my hospital room. And what he says changes everything I believed about my mother. My mother noticed the money had stopped the same way she noticed everything else. When it cost her something. The first day of the month arrived. No deposit appeared. By lunchtime, my phone started ringing. Her name filled the screen. I ignored the first call. Then the second. I answered the third. Because avoiding problems belonged to the old version of me. Her voice sounded warm, friendly, like fresh pie. It was the same voice she used with relatives and restaurant servers. Honey, are you okay? We've been so worried about you and the baby. Worried. The woman who chose a cat. I told her I was recovering. Thank you. There was a short pause. I could almost hear her changing direction. Then her voice slowly became the one I had known my entire life. I noticed the money didn't arrive. Did the bank make a mistake? I calmly answered, no. There wasn't any mistake. Silence. Then came the guilt. Exactly on schedule. After everything your father and I have done for you, we took you to every practice. We kept a roof over your head. I let her continue. She kept talking in circles. Then she reached for the one weapon that had always worked. She said it again. This time more softly. Almost like she was hurt. You know, your sister never has these emergencies. That was the third time I had heard that sentence in only 3 days. But this time, I didn't flinch. I didn't explain. I simply answered, I know, Mom. And I let those words carry a meaning she never intended. Megan never had emergencies, because Megan had always had me. Now, Megan had a declined credit card, and a leased SUV she couldn't afford. I told my mother I needed to feed Nora. Then I hung up. She was still talking when I ended the call. I had never done that before. Not once in 34 years. When the mother couldn't change my mind, she sent the aunt. That afternoon, Aunt Carol texted me directly. She had only done that twice before. Both times to ask me for money to support a raffle. This message was different. It was full of borrowed anger. I'm disgusted. Your parents are barely surviving. Your father is sick, and you cut them off. Your grandmother would be ashamed of you. Family takes care of family. I read it twice. The sentence about my grandmother almost broke me, because Ruth was the one person I never wanted to disappoint. Then I remembered her real words. Someone has to watch this family's money. Your mother won't. Suddenly, everything became clear. Aunt Carol had it completely backward. I didn't write a long explanation. I didn't defend myself. I didn't apologize. Instead, I attached the single printed page, the one with 12 rows, the one that covered 9 years. Then I wrote one sentence underneath it. Here's where the money your sister-in-law says she manages on her own actually went. The Blackhawk withdrawals are hers. Ask her. Then I put my phone down. With one hand, I calmly changed Nora's diaper. It was the most peaceful I had felt in years. My phone buzzed once. I saw the little typing bubbles from Aunt Carol. Then, they disappeared. No reply came. Not that hour. Not that day. I imagined her sitting quietly in her kitchen, reading those 12 rows. Because you can argue with a person's feelings, but you can't argue with a spreadsheet. It simply tells the truth. I had spent my whole life managing everyone else's emotions. For the first time, I realized the kindest thing I could do was simply hand them the facts, then let them sit with them. My mother was many things, but one thing she never did was give up. When acting warm didn't work, and sending Aunt Carol didn't work, she moved to the one place where she always believed she had control. She planned a family dinner. The invitation came through the Reynolds family group chat. She wrote it in her usual sweet, wounded style. Let's all get together on Sunday to welcome baby Nora and clear the air as a family. Paige, I hope you'll come so we can put this misunderstanding behind us. A misunderstanding. Only 5 days after she chose a cat instead of helping my newborn daughter. She called it a misunderstanding. Daniel read the message over my shoulder. You don't have to go, he said. We can stay home with Nora and let them deal with this themselves. He was right. I didn't have to go. But I already knew what Sunday was really about. It wasn't about welcoming my daughter. It was about getting me into a room full of relatives. It was about making me feel guilty until I started sending the money again. It was another performance. She wanted everyone to watch me surrender. So I decided to give her exactly what she wanted. An audience. Just not my surrender. I replied with only 2 words. We'll come. For the first time, the trap had closed around the person who built it. After that, I made one more phone call. I called Grandpa Harold. We talked for 40 minutes. At the end of the conversation, he asked me one simple question. His rough voice was calm. Do you want this handled quietly? Or do you want the truth? I looked at Nora sleeping peacefully in the bend of my good arm. I looked at the little girl I had almost missed raising because I had spent years paying for someone else's lies. The truth, I answered. Then I'll bring the folder, he said. I didn't ask what was inside it. Somehow, I already knew. Whatever was inside that folder would end this once and for all. But before I tell you about the family dinner, I need to go back a few hours. Because something happened before that dinner. Something that changed everything. 3 hours after I canceled those 4 bank transfers. On the night of my accident, while Daniel was still flying home, my hospital room door slowly opened. Grandpa Harold walked inside. He was 78 years old. He wore a neatly pressed flannel shirt buttoned all the way to the top. He walked carefully with a cane he clearly hated needing. Under one arm, he carried a thick manila folder. The edges were worn soft from age. 2 old rubber bands held it closed. They had become pale and brittle over the years. He placed the folder gently at the foot of my hospital bed, like someone setting down something heavy he had carried for a very long time. Then he looked at me, at my broken arm, at the bruises on my face. His jaw tightened. "Your mother told me you had a small fender bender," he said. I drove past 3 exits before I stopped believing her. Then he sat down in the chair beside my bed. He folded both hands over the top of his cane. He looked at me quietly. Then he said the words I will never forget. I knew. I always knew. I asked him softly, "What did you know?" He looked at the folder instead of looking at me. I knew about the money. All 9 years of it. I knew where your mother spent her afternoons. I knew what she told this family while you quietly gave away everything you had. He tapped the folder once. But not tonight. You've been through enough tonight. We'll do this the right way. In front of everyone. Where she can't quietly walk away from the truth. He was right. Some truths need witnesses. Before you left, he decided to tell me one small part of the story. He said I shouldn't walk into Sunday completely blind. He started talking about my grandmother, about Ruth. He told me something I had never known. Ruth hadn't simply accepted everything my mother said during the last year of her life. She had become suspicious. She noticed the expensive spending, the newer car, the casino trips. My mother had stopped trying very hard to hide them. One evening, Ruth quietly cornered Harold. She told him, "Someone is keeping Linda afloat. And it isn't us. Find out who." It took him time. The banks weren't eager to share information. But Harold had spent 40 years managing the books for cattle operations. He knew how to follow money. Eventually, he found me. He found 9 years of bank transfers. 9 years of one granddaughter quietly giving away almost everything she could spare. Supporting the hole my mother kept digging. Ruth wanted to fix everything before she died. But she ran out of time. So instead, she did the next best thing. Harold wouldn't tell me everything yet. Not until Sunday. But he did tell me one important thing. During the last months of her life, Ruth worked with a lawyer. Whatever she put in place had both her signature and Harold's. An attorney in Boulder believed it would stand. In this state, Harold explained, a trust written the way Ruth and I wrote ours does exactly what we wanted it to do. Then he slowly stood up. He picked up the folder. Before leaving, he stopped at the door. "She was never ashamed of you, Paige. No matter what your mother says, your grandmother trusted you with everything. That's why she chose you." Then he quietly walked away. That night, I barely slept. The day before the family dinner, Harold came to our house to check on me. I asked him the question I had carried inside me for years. Why Megan? Why did Mom spend 30 years treating one daughter like a treasure and the other like a tool? Harold sat quietly for a while, turning his coffee cup in his hands. Finally, he spoke. You have to understand how Ruth raised Linda. I immediately felt nervous. I loved Ruth. I didn't want to believe she had done anything wrong. Ruth was a hard woman, Harold said. She was usually fair, but she was hard. And she had a favorite child. It wasn't your mother. It was your Uncle Danny. God rest his soul. I felt like the floor disappeared under me because I knew exactly what that role felt like. I had lived it myself. When Linda had you, Harold continued, and you turned out quiet, responsible, steady, just like she had been. Something inside her couldn't stand it. But when Megan was born, loud, needy, full of energy, Linda finally got the chance to become the mother of the favorite child. She finally got to give Megan the love she never received herself. He gently placed his coffee cup down. It's not an excuse. It's simply how the story began. I sat there quietly, thinking about everything he had said. My mother wasn't some cartoon villain. She wasn't evil just for the sake of being evil. She was someone who had once been the forgotten daughter herself. Instead of ending that cycle, she passed it on to me and made Megan the favorite. The casino, Harold added, was the only place where Linda ever felt she might finally win something she hadn't earned by always being the responsible one. I understood my mother better than ever before, and I was still finished. That night, I decided exactly what Sunday would be. And I also decided what it would not be. It would not become a shouting match. I had watched my mother win too many arguments that way. She knew how to raise her voice until everyone believed her. The moment I started yelling, I would become exactly what she wanted everyone to see. The ungrateful, emotional, out-of-control daughter. I wasn't going to give her that. I wasn't going to give her noise. I was going to give her paper. Think about the difference. My mother's strongest weapons were words. Warm lies. Carefully planned guilt. Stories told to relatives until they became accepted as truth. My weapons were much simpler. One printed page. One screenshot on Daniel's phone. One folder carried by my grandfather. She would tell stories. I would show documents. She would create emotions. I would show facts. She depended on feelings. I depended on evidence. And everyone she gathered to shame me would become witnesses instead. That evening, while Nora slept, I explained my plan to Daniel in the kitchen. I'm not going to argue with her, I said. I'm going to show up. Put the papers on the table and let them speak. He looked at me carefully. Are you sure you can stay calm? You know how your mother is. I thought about every family dinner where I had stayed quiet. Every check I had written. Every time I had protected everyone's feelings instead of telling the truth. I've been calm my whole life, I answered. I've just stopped being silent. Those are two different things. It had taken a truck, a hospital bed, a broken arm, and my grandfather carrying a worn folder to teach me that lesson. I placed my printed page inside Nora's diaper bag. I slid it underneath the baby wipes. No one would think to look there. Megan returned from her cruise on Saturday. She called me from the airport. That phone call told me everything. My entire world had changed. Hers hadn't changed at all. "Okay," she said, before even saying hello. The cruise was kind of ruined. I waited. I spent the whole trip stressed about my card. Do you know how embarrassing it is when your card gets declined in front of people? I looked at Nora sleeping peacefully beside me. I stayed quiet. She took my silence as permission to keep talking. Mom said you had some kind of meltdown and stopped the family money. I mean, fine. Have your feelings. But I have a product launch coming. I literally can't function without the account. So can you just fix everything before dinner tomorrow? I don't want everyone making a huge deal out of this. Fix everything. As if almost dying. As if leaving my newborn without her mother. As if all of that was nothing more than a small inconvenience for her social media schedule. I asked her one simple question. "Megan, where do you think that money comes from?" There was a long pause. The first real pause I had ever heard from her. "Mom and Dad," she answered. But her voice lifted slightly at the end. Like she wasn't completely sure anymore. "It's a family thing." I told her I would see her tomorrow. Then I ended the call. Some lessons can't be explained. People have to discover them themselves. She didn't know it yet. But tomorrow, she was going to learn who had really been paying for her life during the last 9 years. In front of our entire family. There would be no credit card to save her. No story to hide behind. Sunday finally arrived. We drove to my parents' house. The same house whose mortgage I had believed I was paying every month. I sat quietly in the car for a moment before getting out. I needed one last second to prepare myself. My right arm was still in a cast. The hospital ID bracelet was still wrapped around my wrist. It had been there for 5 days. The plastic had become soft and gray. I kept it on for a reason. Finally, I slipped it off. Then I placed it inside my coat pocket. I wanted it with me. A small piece of proof. Proof of where I had been. On the night my mother chose a cat. Daniel lifted Nora's car seat with one hand. As we stepped toward the house, I heard the slow tap. Tap? Tap. Of a cane behind us. I turned around. There was Grandpa Harold. Still wearing his Sunday flannel shirt. Still carrying the old manila folder under his arm. The faded rubber bands were still wrapped around it. He had insisted on arriving separately. He didn't want my mother to see us together before we walked inside. "You ready?" he quietly asked. Through the front window, I could already see everyone gathered inside. Aunt Carol, 2 of my cousins, my father sitting quietly in his chair, my mother walking around with a coffee pot, smiling, playing the role of the wounded hostess, the queen of a house I had quietly paid for without ever being treated like family. Megan sat on the arm of the couch, looking down at her phone, still slightly sunburned from the cruise, still completely unaware of what was about to happen. "I'm ready," I answered. And for the first time in my life, I truly meant those words. Harold gently pushed the front door open with his cane. The 3 of us walked inside together. 3 generations. A baby. A cast. A hospital bracelet tucked into my pocket. And one old folder. Exactly the things my mother never wanted standing together in the same room. The conversation stopped immediately. My mother turned around with the coffee pot still in her hand. Her welcoming smile was already waiting on her face. The performance was about to begin. My mother was a very good performer. I'll give her that. She started the evening perfectly. She set the coffee pot down, placed one hand over her heart, then walked across the room toward Nora. Her eyes were already filling with tears for everyone to see. "Oh, there's my precious granddaughter," she said sweetly as she reached for the baby. Daniel gently turned the car seat away. He wasn't rude. He wasn't angry. He simply made sure she couldn't pick Nora up. My mother's reaching hand stopped in the air. For just a second. Then she smoothly turned that awkward moment into the first act of her performance. She didn't look at me. She looked at everyone else. "I'm just so thankful we're finally all together," she said, her voice shaking at exactly the right moment. This has been the hardest week of my life. Her life. The week I had spent in a hospital bed had somehow become the hardest week of her life. She told everyone that I had been in a small accident. She thanked God I was alive. Then she explained how I had used that accident as an excuse to punish my struggling parents. She said I had abandoned them in their old age because of an imaginary problem. She gently wiped away tears. Right on cue. Aunt Carol nodded. But I noticed something. She never looked directly at me. I knew why. Those 12 rows of numbers were still sitting in the back of her mind. My father stared down at his hands. He never looked up. Megan finally looked away from her phone. She seemed confused. Like she realized this conversation included her somehow. But she didn't know her lines. Then my mother delivered her strongest line. The one that had won sympathy for decades. She finally turned toward me. Her eyes looked wet. Her voice sounded soft and wounded. I don't understand where all this cruelty came from. Then she said it again. The sentence she had used 4 times already. Your sister never has these emergencies. That was the 4th time. 4 times in one warm room. With everyone watching. She had no idea she had just handed me exactly what I needed. The room became silent. Everyone waited. They expected me to cry, or yell, or defend myself. I did none of those things. Instead, I reached into Nora's diaper bag, under the baby wipes. I pulled out one folded sheet of paper. I didn't stand up. I didn't make a speech. I quietly unfolded the page. I smoothed it flat against my leg with my good hand. Then I placed it in the center of the dining table, right beneath the light, in the same calm voice I used during financial presentations at work. I spoke. You're right, Mom. Megan never has these emergencies. I'd like to show everyone why. Then I slid the paper toward the middle of the table. This page shows every dollar I sent this family during the last 9 years. $486,000. No one moved. No one spoke. Even Aunt Carol leaned forward to read it. The first section is real. $65,000 for Dad's heart treatment. His cardiologist. His prescriptions. $11,000 toward this mortgage. I paused. Just long enough for everyone to absorb it. Everything else is the part Mom says she paid for herself. I gently touched the page, only to guide everyone's eyes. $290,000 withdrawn as cash over 9 years. Almost every withdrawal happened within 2 miles of the Black Hawk Casino. A quiet sound spread across the room. People slowly breathed in. It sounded like a story breaking apart. Then I continued. $120,000 went to Megan. That includes the $40,000 listed as Dad's surgery. So no one would ask questions. Slowly, Megan raised her head. She looked completely confused. I looked at her gently, because this part truly wasn't her fault. That's where your card money came from, Meg. It came from me. It always came from me. My mother's performance suddenly had nowhere left to go. The tears she had worked so hard to create were now simply tears on the face of someone who had been caught. Her hands shook. She looked at me. I never raised my voice. Not even once. It's handled, I quietly said. Only 2 words. 3 days of heartbreak. 9 years of silence. Everything had come down to those 2 words. They landed in the room like the sound of a judge's gavel. My mother opened her mouth. She reached for the only weapon she still had. Words. Lies, she shouted. You twisted everything. You're an ungrateful child. Your father and I never. She never finished. At that exact moment, Grandpa Harold slowly leaned his cane against the table. Then he placed the old manila folder beside my single printed page. The old rubber bands had become stiff with age. He carefully removed them. They had been wrapped around that folder for so long. They had left deep marks in the paper. He opened the folder slowly, without rushing, like a man who had waited an entire year for this exact moment. Then, for the first time since arriving, he spoke. His rough, quiet voice somehow filled the room better than all of my mother's tears. I knew. I always knew. He wasn't speaking to my mother. He was speaking to everyone else. Ruth knew too. Before she died, she asked me to follow the money. Then he removed one thick, stapled document. A law firm's name from Boulder appeared across the front page. This, he said, is the trust your grandmother and I created. Last spring, Ruth and I moved almost everything we owned into this trust. The land, this house, our accounts. Everyone stared. Then Harold said the words my mother never expected to hear. It does not belong to Linda. Linda does not control a single dollar. Finally, he looked directly at my mother. There was no anger in his face. Only sadness. Only certainty. We left everything to Paige. And to baby Nora. There is money set aside for Nora's education. The rest is protected inside the trust. Exactly the way Ruth wanted. So it can never be gambled away. He gently tapped the front of the document. My attorney says this trust is solid. We made very sure of that. For the first time in my life, I watched my mother's mask disappear. The hurt mother, the loving hostess, the victim, all of it vanished. Underneath, there was only panic. Because the house she believed she ruled, the story she had controlled for 30 years, had just been taken away by a few signatures on official paper. No one was looking at me anymore. Everyone was looking at her. What happened next is the part most people hope ends with an apology. It almost never does. I wish someone had prepared me for that. My mother did not say she was sorry. Instead, she tried everything else first. She burst into loud tears, real enough to sound convincing. But when no one rushed to comfort her, she quickly changed direction. She turned toward my father. "Roy," she cried, "are you really going to let them do this to me? This is your fault too. The surgery, everything." My father flinched. For one brief moment. The same moment I had heard during our phone call. He looked up. He looked at me. His mouth slowly opened. I honestly believed this was finally the moment. The moment he would stand beside me. "Paige is right," he whispered. "Linda, the casino?" "You know it's been." Before he could finish, my mother turned toward him. She gave him a look that had controlled him for 40 years. He stopped speaking. Immediately. Then he lowered his eyes back to his hands. That was the last thing my father said. And in that moment, something inside me quietly let him go. Not with anger, not with hate, just acceptance. My mother realized even his silence could no longer save her. So she became angry. Very angry. "You'll regret this," she shouted at me. "I'll fight that trust. I'll hire a lawyer." "You can't just steal someone's home." Before I could answer, Grandpa Harold spoke. His voice stayed calm. "It was never your home, Linda. It belonged to your mother. And when the paperwork is done correctly, cases like this almost never change in court." He carefully chose his words. He said, "Almost never," because Harold was an honest man. Even then, he refused to promise something he couldn't guarantee. Across the room, Megan was crying. Not fake tears. Real ones. She wasn't crying for me. She was crying because she had finally realized something. The well had a bottom. And for 9 years. She'd been standing on the person holding it up. I quietly gathered my printed page from the table. There was only one thing left for me to do. It turned out to be the easiest thing of all. I slowly stood. My ribs still hurt too much for dramatic movements. Daniel handed me Nora's car seat. I held it close for a moment. Then I reached into my coat pocket. I pulled out my gray hospital ID bracelet, the one I had worn for 5 days. Without saying a word, I wrapped it around the handle of Nora's car seat. Then I left it there. A small, ugly, simple reminder. Something I would see every time I carried my daughter. Not the spreadsheet. Not the trust. Not the bank account. That little hospital bracelet told the whole story. The night I almost died, my family checked a cruise schedule. My mother was still talking. Her threats slowly turned into begging. "Paige, honey, we can fix this. We're family." But her voice no longer reached me. It was like walking out of a room where music is playing. The song keeps playing. You just can't hear it anymore. I turned toward Aunt Carol. She looked pale, very quiet. Without anger, I said, "Thank you for reading the numbers, Carol. I know you'll tell everyone the truth." It wasn't a threat. It was simply true. She nodded. Then I looked at my father one last time. He finally met my eyes. I gave him a small nod. It meant I understood. I wasn't angry anymore, but I was still leaving.